My wife said spouses weren't invited to her company gala. The next morning, the event photographer sent me a picture of a married client, handing her the bracelet she had told me was a company award. A little after 9, while I was reviewing subcontractor schedules at work, an email from the event photographer appeared in my inbox. I almost deleted it. Its subject line said the Bellamy and Reed Annual Awards and Client Gala Gallery was ready. I had attended the same event with Chloe the previous 2 years, so I assumed the photography company had never cleaned its old guest list. This year, Chloe had told me the rules changed. Bellamy and Reed had picked up more clients, she said, and the ballroom was tight enough that employees were no longer getting automatic +1s. Senior clients and their guests had taken priority. She also said several account staff were staying at the hotel because an early client breakfast was scheduled for the next morning, so she expected to stay overnight. I had been disappointed, mostly because the gala was one of the few times I saw the part of Chloe's career she talked about every day. She was 31, a senior account executive, and ambitious in a way I used to admire without thinking much about it. Holloway Development was one of the biggest accounts she handled, and she had spent most of the year saying that if the account grew the way she expected, an account director promotion might finally become realistic. I had wished her luck, helped her choose between 2 dresses, and stayed home. Before I went to bed, she texted that the event had run late and that she was staying at the hotel as planned. The gallery opened with exactly what I expected: speeches, award photos, staff groups, cocktails, and tables full of clients. I clicked through without much interest until I noticed a man I knew standing beside one of Chloe's coworkers. He was her husband. I went back 3 photographs and found another employee with her wife. A managing director was standing with his girlfriend in a different frame. Whatever the exact invitation rules were, the gala had not simply stopped allowing spouses. I tried to find a harmless explanation. Maybe invitations varied by seniority. Maybe some of those people were connected to clients as well as employees. Then I found Chloe. Grant Holloway was beside her. I knew his name long before I knew his face, because Chloe talked about Holloway Development constantly. The account represented close to $2 million in annual work for Bellamy and Reed. Grant was the founder, chief executive, and majority owner, and Chloe described him as demanding, impatient, and unusually willing to spend when he believed something would improve a project. She had also told me more than once that he respected her judgment. The first photograph showed them standing with 6 other people, and nothing about it looked unusual. The next was taken near the cocktail area. Chloe and Grant were talking alone, his hand resting on the lower part of her back while she leaned close enough that the pose made me uncomfortable. I kept going until another sequence showed them at one of the dinner tables, with Grant seated beside Chloe. A few frames later, I reached the photograph that stopped me. Grant was holding out a small dark jewelry box, and Chloe was opening it with both hands while smiling at him. I recognized the bracelet before I enlarged the picture. Chloe had come home wearing it a little after 8 that morning, before I left for work. She said the client breakfast had run long, held up her wrist, and told me Bellamy and Reed had given a few top performers recognition gifts that year. I remembered joking that the company had better not be substituting jewelry for money. She laughed and told me it was only a small award. The bracelet in the photograph was not being handed to her by anyone from Bellamy and Reed. Grant Holloway was giving it to her personally. I downloaded the image and went back through the gallery more carefully. 2 more photographs showed employee spouses I recognized from earlier events, including a man I had spoken with the previous year. At that point, I could document 2 things without guessing about anything else. Chloe had lied about why I was not invited, and she had lied about where the bracelet came from. The rest still required answers. At 34, I was old enough to know that one uncomfortable photograph did not prove an affair. I managed commercial construction projects for a living, and most of my day was spent separating assumptions from things that could actually be documented. So I saved the public gallery link, downloaded the relevant photographs, and took screenshots showing the event date. I left Chloe's laptop alone, made no attempt to guess her phone password, and did not contact Grant. I was deciding whether to call Chloe when my work line rang from an outside number. The woman on the other end asked whether I was Evan Parker, and then introduced herself as Rebecca Holloway. She later explained that she remembered my full name from the previous year's gala, and found my office number on my employer's public contact page. For a second, the name did not register because I was still looking at Grant's face on my monitor. Then, I remembered her. Rebecca and I had met briefly at the previous year's gala and stood in the same small group for maybe 5 minutes, while Chloe and Grant discussed a development campaign neither Rebecca nor I worked on. Rebecca's voice was controlled. "I am sorry to call you like this, but I think your wife and my husband left the gala together." I looked again at the bracelet photograph and asked what made her think that. Grant had told Rebecca he was staying at the hotel after the event for a client strategy meeting. That by itself was not unusual. The problem was the expense activity. Rebecca was a minority owner of Holloway Development and oversaw enough finance and operations work that executive expenses passed through reporting she could review. Grant had checked out shortly after 7, and because the room was booked through Holloway's corporate travel account, the itemized hotel folio routed automatically into the finance queue. It showed the suite and a breakfast order for 2. A separate corporate card feed showed a jewelry purchase for just under $3,000. She was careful not to claim that any of those charges proved Chloe had stayed with him. Instead, she explained why she had started looking. "I was trying to determine whether the jewelry was a legitimate business expense," she said. "Then I found the Gala gallery." Rebecca asked whether Chloe was wearing a new bracelet. I told her she was, and that Chloe had said Bellamy and Reed gave it to her as a recognition award. Rebecca was quiet for a few seconds. "That is not what Grant's expense record suggests." I asked whether the jewelry charge definitely remained a Holloway Development expense. She corrected me immediately. "The charge is in the executive expense feed I can review. I am still checking whether he reimbursed it privately. I do not want to tell you more than I know." Her caution made me trust her more than a dramatic accusation would have. I told Rebecca what I had found in the official gallery. Other spouses were clearly present, and Grant had been photographed handing Chloe the bracelet himself. Rebecca then mentioned one more item she was still trying to understand. 8 months earlier, Grant had charged an expensive dinner at a hotel restaurant as Bellamy client development. His work calendar for that evening listed a Holloway account meeting with Chloe. By itself, the old charge proved nothing. It did tell Rebecca that the gala was not the first time Grant's spending and Chloe's account work had overlapped in a way she wanted to examine more closely. Neither of us filled in the missing pieces. We agreed on something simple. If either of us found information we already had a legitimate reason to possess, and it directly affected the other's marriage, we would share it and leave everything else alone. I told her I was going to speak to Chloe that evening. Rebecca said she was not ready to confront Grant because she wanted to understand the company expenses before he knew she was reviewing them. That difference mattered. We were not forming a revenge team. We were 2 spouses who had discovered that the same 2 people might have been lying to both of us. Before we hung up, Rebecca gave me the exact bracelet amount, $2,890. I looked again at Chloe's wrist in the photograph. We had spent less than that on our last 4-day vacation. The number bothered me more than I expected, not because Chloe and I could never afford a bracelet like that. We were doing well. I made a little over $100,000 a year. She earned good money at Bellamy and Reed. And we had nearly $86,000 saved toward our next house. We were not struggling. We were careful. And until recently, I thought we agreed that careful was how people kept a good income from turning into a fragile lifestyle. That difference had started irritating Chloe over the previous year. Our original plan was to buy a detached house somewhere in the mid-500 to mid-600,000 range after another year of saving. Chloe had gradually begun sending me listings, closer to 900,000, new construction, a better neighborhood, a bigger kitchen, and the kind of entrance designed to impress people before they reached the living room. Whenever I pointed out what the payment would do to the rest of our budget, she said some version of the same thing. Why are we always waiting? I thought she was impatient. I had never considered that the people she met through work might be changing the scale she used to judge our life. Looking at the bracelet, I wondered whether impatience had turned into something else. I left work at my normal time because I did not want to arrive home looking like I had spent the afternoon rehearsing. Chloe was already there. She had changed out of work clothes and was standing at the kitchen island scrolling through her phone. The bracelet was still on her wrist. Once I noticed it, I could not stop noticing it. She looked up and asked whether I wanted pasta or takeout. Before dinner, I want to ask you something. She heard the tone immediately and put her phone down. I opened the photograph on my tablet and set it on the island between us. Chloe looked at the image without touching the screen. Why did Grant Holloway give you that bracelet? She folded her arms. He gave gifts to people on the account. That isn't what you told me. I said it was a work gift. You said Bellamy and Reed gave it to top performers. Chloe looked annoyed. Because I knew if I said a client gave me jewelry, you would make it weird. I stared at her. You thought the less weird version was lying about who gave it to you. It was a thank you gift, Evan. Grant is generous with people who work hard for him. I asked whether everyone on the account received a bracelet worth almost $3,000. Her expression changed just enough to tell me the number mattered. Where did you get that? I did not answer. Instead, I asked whether Bellamy and Reed required expensive client gifts to be disclosed. Chloe looked away before saying policies like that were written for obvious bribery situations, and that this was personal appreciation. The word personal sat between us. I asked whether she had disclosed the bracelet. She started talking about Grant's importance to the agency, the size of the Holloway account, and how much it mattered that he trusted her when director promotions were being discussed. Then she said, "You know how important that account is to my career." I was asking why another married man had given my wife nearly $3,000 in jewelry, and she was explaining why the client mattered to her promotion. The mismatch was small on the surface, but it told me what she was trying hardest to protect before I had even mentioned the hotel. I repeated the question about disclosure, and Chloe finally admitted that she had never reported the bracelet. I acknowledged the answer without arguing, and waited for her to explain what she thought that meant. Chloe watched me closely. You are acting like I did something terrible, because a client gave me a gift. That isn't the only thing I am asking about. The change in her expression was immediate when I told her Rebecca Holloway had called me. Whatever calm Chloe had been holding disappeared. Why would she call you? She thinks you and Grant left the gala together. Chloe immediately said Rebecca was paranoid about Grant's spending. I asked why Grant had a hotel suite that night. Chloe called it a client meeting, so I asked whether she had been there. After hesitating, she admitted she had gone up for a while, because several people were supposedly discussing work after the gala. I asked who else had been in the suite. Chloe said people came and went, but she could not give me a single name. Then I asked about the room, service breakfast for two. Her face changed again, and she wanted to know whether Rebecca had told me about it. I confirmed that she had. Chloe walked away from the island and stopped near the sink with her back to me. I stayed where I was and waited. After a long silence, she said, things between Grant and me crossed a line. The wording was careful enough to tell me there was more behind it, so I asked her to stop describing the boundary and tell me what had actually happened. Chloe turned around and said they had gotten too close. When I asked directly whether she had slept with him, she lowered her eyes and admitted that she had. I did not ask whether the gala was the first time because the way she framed the admission already told me it was not. I asked how long the relationship had been going on. Chloe pressed both hands against the edge of the counter before answering, a few months. I thought about Rebecca's call and the 8-month-old Bellamy client dinner on Grant's expense record. That old charge did not prove when the affair began, but it gave me a reason not to accept Chloe's timeline without another question. I already knew enough to doubt the answer. Chloe's few months lasted until the next question. When did it start? She stared at the counter instead of answering, so I told her Rebecca had found a Bellamy client dinner on Grant's expense history from 8 months earlier. I was careful not to call it proof. All I knew was that the dinner existed. Chloe had been the account contact on his calendar, and the date was much older than the timeline she had just given me. Chloe immediately said the dinner had been work. Then when did it stop being work? She rubbed one hand over the other wrist, the bracelet still catching the kitchen light, and said the change had not happened all at once. I asked her to give me a month. She named one from roughly 3 months earlier. Then, I asked what happened before that. Chloe admitted there had been flirting, private dinners, and messages that had nothing to do with work. The boundary kept moving backward. I asked when they first kissed. Chloe gave me a date around 6 months earlier. When I asked about the first time they slept together, she said 5 months. Then I returned to the 8-month-old dinner. Chloe closed her eyes. That was the first time he told me he was attracted to me. That was not the same as the affair beginning, but it was a long way from the version she had given me 10 minutes earlier. I asked whether she had encouraged it. Chloe looked down and said, "I didn't stop it." The distinction sounded important to her, as if failing to stop something required less ownership than choosing it. Before I asked another question, I opened our banking app and paused the next automatic transfer from my checking account into the house fund. I did not move a dollar already saved. I stopped one future contribution that had been scheduled for the end of the week. Chloe watched me do it and asked what I was trying to prove. "Nothing. I just learned you've been sleeping with someone else for 5 months. I am not automatically putting more money into our next house tonight." She called that dramatic. I told her the existing fund was untouched and that we could deal with the rest after I had legal advice. Then I put the phone down and went back to the timeline. I sat at the kitchen table and asked her to tell me the sequence once without changing it. "The first couple of months had been mostly work," she said. "Grant called her directly more often than most clients. He asked for her opinion instead of routing everything through senior leadership. He invited her to dinners when projects were being discussed and told her she understood Holloway development better than people at Bellamy and Reed, who outranked her. Then the compliments changed. He started telling her she was wasting time waiting for other people to recognize what she could do. One night after dinner, he told her, 'You belong in rooms like this.'" Chloe repeated the sentence, quietly enough that I could tell she remembered exactly how it had felt to hear it. I asked what rooms he meant. "You know what he meant. I want to hear what you thought he meant." She leaned against the counter. "People who make decisions. People who don't spend all their time asking whether something is too expensive or whether they should wait another year." There it was again. Grant was not only a man she wanted. He represented a doorway into the kind of life she had started measuring hours against. I asked whether she had been unhappy with me before Grant. Chloe said she had not. So I asked what she believed was missing. After thinking about it, she gave me an answer that probably felt honest to her. Momentum. We had 2 good incomes, nearly $86,000 saved, no children, manageable debt, and a plan to buy a house within another year. To me, that looked like progress. To Chloe, it had started looking like standing still. She said Grant never worried about whether dinner was overpriced, whether a hotel suite was practical, or whether buying something now would interfere with another goal 6 months later. "He just does things," she said. I told her that was easier when someone had Grant's money. Chloe insisted money was not the whole attraction, but she did not deny that it was part of it. I asked about the designer handbag she had brought home in the spring. Chloe looked at me before admitting Grant had bought it. A month after their first kiss, she had told me she used part of her annual bonus for the bag. It cost around $1,700. I asked about a weekend spa package she had described as connected to a client retreat. Grant had paid for that too. The business class upgrade on a work trip had come from him as well. There were other dinners, hotel rooms, and smaller gifts she could not immediately total. Rebecca later sent me a short list from Grant's side that matched several dates Chloe had just admitted. Some charges were clearly personal. Others had passed through executive expense reporting and were still being reviewed. The total value of what Chloe admitted receiving was somewhere in the low 5 figures. I stopped trying to calculate it exactly because the pattern mattered more than the total. Every expensive thing had come home with a different explanation. She called the handbag a bonus purchase, the spa weekend a client retreat, the flight upgrade business travel, and the bracelet a company recognition award. She had built a normal explanation for every visible benefit and kept the real source outside the marriage. Looking back, I could see how carefully those explanations had been chosen. Each one was plausible enough that asking another question would have made me feel suspicious rather than responsible. I asked why she had not simply bought those things herself. Chloe bristled and reminded me that she could afford a bag. When I asked why she still let Grant buy it, she said he wanted to. I pushed once more, asking why his willingness mattered so much. She looked at me as though the answer should have been obvious. It felt good to be with somebody who didn't make everything a calculation. I let the sentence sit between us. Our entire house plan was built on calculations. We had discussed mortgage rates, property taxes, emergency reserves, furniture commute time, and what kind of payment would still let us travel without putting everything else on cards. I had thought those conversations meant we were building something together. Chloe had started hearing them, as evidence that I was keeping her from a better life. Grant offered the opposite feeling: no waiting, no compromise, and no visible cost. Chloe could enjoy the expensive part immediately, while somebody else absorbed the price. I asked what she believed would happen if the relationship continued. Chloe immediately said she had never made a plan to leave me. That was not what I had asked. She said Grant had talked about his marriage being unhappy. When I asked whether he had actually said he was leaving Rebecca, Chloe admitted he had not. He said things could look different next year. I asked what that meant. Chloe hesitated before explaining that Holloway Development expected to increase its marketing budget. Grant had told her that if Bellamy and Reed kept the account and expanded the work, he would make it clear he preferred dealing with Chloe directly. That would strengthen her case for account director. Grant had also told her his marriage was complicated, and that he was thinking seriously about what he wanted. I asked whether he had ever given her a date, and Chloe admitted that he had not. Then I asked whether she had quietly given herself one. Chloe became defensive and insisted she had not been running some plan. You were waiting for information. What does that mean? It means you kept me while you waited to see what happened with him. She shook her head and called that unfair. I asked what she would have done if Grant left Rebecca 6 months from now and told her he wanted a real relationship. Chloe did not answer. I asked what she would have done if her promotion came through at the same time. She still had nothing to say. Then I asked the opposite question. What if Grant stayed married and the promotion never happened? She looked at me. That silence told me more than the other answers. I had not been chosen over Grant. I was simply the option that remained safe while Chloe waited to see whether the other future became real enough to justify leaving. She still had our home, our savings plan, and my income moving toward the next house, while she tested whether Grant could offer something she considered better. The arrangement worked only because I did not know I was part of it. She followed me into the living room and said I was turning uncertainty into a decision she had never made. Maybe she was right about the wording. She had not decided to leave me. She had decided not to decide, while the better option was still being evaluated. And that told me more about my place in her plan than another confession would have. I slept in the guest room that night. The next morning, before work, I downloaded statements for the account where we kept the house fund. The balance was a little over $86,000, exactly where I had left it when I paused the scheduled transfer the night before. Then, I called a divorce attorney during lunch. At that stage, the advice was simple: document the accounts, avoid dramatic transfers, and stop making optional financial commitments that assumed the marriage would continue if I was no longer sure it would. That afternoon, I turned the boundary I had set the night before into something systematic. I changed my payroll deposit, so my salary went into an individual checking account I had maintained for years, while continuing to transfer enough to cover my normal share of the mortgage, utilities, insurance, and household expenses. The bigger change involved my annual performance bonus. For the previous 3 years, most of it had gone directly into the house fund. This time, I kept it in my individual account instead. I was not taking money away from Chloe or touching the $86,000 already saved. I was stopping new money from flowing into a future I no longer knew we had. She noticed within 2 days. Our banking app showed my regular household transfer, but not the larger amount she expected after my bonus cleared. Chloe came into the guest room holding her phone and asked where the rest of the bonus was. I told her it was in my individual account. Her face tightened as she asked, "You moved your paycheck too?" "Yes, but I am still paying my share of every current bill." "That is not what we agreed." "What we agreed was that we were saving for a house together." Chloe insisted that we still were. I looked at her long enough that the certainty faded before she could add anything else. Then I said, "I am not taking your money. I am stopping contributions to a house we may never buy together." Chloe accused me of using money to punish her and said I was making permanent decisions while emotional. I reminded her that nothing permanent had happened to the existing house fund. The money and her share were still there. What I had stopped was the automatic assumption that every new dollar I earned would keep financing a future Chloe had quietly put on hold. If we eventually reconciled, the money in my individual account would still exist. That evening, Rebecca called again. She had more clarity on Grant's expenses. Some of the gifts were personal purchases he had already reimbursed. Others were messier. The Gala suite had initially gone through Holloway development, so had one private dinner Chloe had just admitted was not purely business. Rebecca had turned those items over to the company's outside accountant and counsel because she wanted an independent review before Grant could simply reclassify everything himself. Then she mentioned something I had not expected. During the same period, Holloway Development had received several favorable account adjustments from Bellamy and Reed. A rush fee had been waived, payment terms had been extended, additional production hours had been absorbed without a separate charge. There was also a small scope discount on one campaign. Rebecca was careful again. I do not know whether Chloe approved all of those. I told her Chloe probably had discretion over at least some of them. That may be completely normal, Rebecca said. The problem is that I now have to ask whether the personal relationship overlapped with decisions involving our companies. That was the first time the affair stopped being only a marriage problem. When Chloe came home, I asked about the adjustments. She reacted as though Rebecca had accused her of stealing. Chloe said those were normal account management decisions and that she had authority to waive some fees. I didn't say you didn't. Then what are you accusing me of? Did Bellamy know you were sleeping with the client whose account you were managing? Her mouth tightened before she admitted the company did not. I asked whether Bellamy knew she had accepted expensive gifts from him. Again, the answer was no. Then I asked whether she had disclosed the relationship in any form, and Chloe admitted that she had not. Chloe started pacing and explained each account decision separately. Chloe said the rush fee had been waived because Bellamy caused part of the delay. She described the extended terms as a response to cash timing on a development project, while the extra production hours were meant to keep Holloway from moving work to a competitor. Every explanation could have been legitimate. That was precisely why the hidden relationship mattered. I was not claiming she had stolen from her employer or bribed a client. The issue was that Bellamy had allowed her to exercise judgment on an important account without knowing she had a private relationship with the man benefiting from those decisions. Chloe understood the risk before I finished saying it. Her anger changed into fear. Evan, whatever happens between us, do not involve Bellamy and Reed. I watched her for a moment before asking why that mattered more than everything else we had been discussing. Chloe said I already knew why. I told her I wanted to hear the reason from her. She sat down and said her promotion was already under discussion. Holloway was her biggest account. If the affair became an ethics issue, years of work could disappear because of something she still wanted to describe as private. Private things become less private when they overlap with client decisions. She shook her head. Please don't do this. It was the first time since the Gala that she sounded more afraid than defensive. Chloe offered to end things with Grant, return the bracelet, and any other gifts that could still be returned, and go to counseling if I wanted. Then she repeated the request that clearly mattered most. Whatever you decide about us, leave my job out of it. I gave her no promise. The next morning, Rebecca sent me a message before I left for work. Her agency should probably know about the gifts before they review next year's Holloway contract. I read the message twice, then called the attorney again. Until then, Chloe had treated her job as the one part of the affair she could still keep protected. I was about to find out whether that protection depended on nobody knowing the conflict existed. The attorney did not tell me to expose Chloe's affair. He told me to separate the marriage from the facts that involved Bellamy and Reed, and that distinction became the basis for everything I did next. I explained that Chloe managed the Holloway development account, had accepted expensive gifts from Grant Holloway, had admitted an undisclosed sexual relationship with him, and had continued making account decisions while the relationship was active. I also explained that some of the favorable adjustments Rebecca found might have been legitimate. The attorney asked whether I could support every fact I planned to state. I said I could support the relationship from Chloe's own admission, the bracelet from the Gala photograph, the gift value from Rebecca's expense information, and Chloe's role on the account from public company material, and what she had told me for years. I could not prove why any particular fee had been waived. Then don't claim you can, he said. That gave me a clean boundary. I was not trying to prove fraud, bribery, or anything criminal. The narrower question was whether Bellamy and Reed should know that one of its senior account executives had an undisclosed intimate relationship with the chief executive of a major client, while accepting expensive gifts and continuing to exercise judgment over that account. The attorney advised me to leave out explicit sexual details, keep the disclosure narrow, and avoid demanding any particular punishment. I followed that advice and wrote one email to Bellamy and Reed's managing partner and head of human resources. It was less than a page. The email identified me as Chloe Parker's husband and stated that she had admitted an undisclosed intimate relationship with Grant Holloway while she was responsible for the Holloway development account. It also noted that she had accepted gifts worth several $1,000s from him, including a bracelet photographed at the annual gala, and that the relationship overlapped with her handling of client pricing, hospitality, and account adjustments. Then, I added the most important sentence. Nothing in the email alleged that any specific commercial decision was improper. I was notifying Bellamy of a conflict it might want to review independently. The only attachment was the gala photograph. I stated that Chloe had admitted the relationship directly to me, and that Bellamy should verify the facts with her, rather than treat my email as a substitute for its own investigation. Rebecca's internal Holloway records stayed out of it, along with confidential client information and any suggestion about what penalty Bellamy should impose. That restraint mattered, because I wanted the next step to belong to the agency. If Bellamy looked at the facts and decided there was no policy issue, that would be its decision. If it found a conflict, Chloe would have to deal with consequences created by her own undisclosed choices, rather than by an accusation I had exaggerated. I sent the email and went back to work. Bellamy and Reed did not contact me that day. It contacted Chloe instead. She came home before 6 with the look of someone who had spent the last several hours trying not to panic in front of coworkers. "You contacted my company." There was no greeting. I told her I had given Bellamy facts that involved its client relationship and that I had spoken to a lawyer before sending anything. That stopped her for half a second, but the anger returned as she explained that the agency had pulled her off Holloway that afternoon. The reassignment was supposed to be temporary during the conflict review, and Melissa Chen had taken over the account. Melissa was another senior account lead Chloe had mentioned before. She was experienced, well-liked, and one of the people competing for the next director opening. Every week Melissa held Holloway was a week Chloe was no longer demonstrating that one of the agency's biggest accounts depended on her. Chloe dropped her bag on a chair and reminded me that her promotion meeting had been scheduled for the following week. Bellamy had postponed it. I had expected some kind of review. I had not expected the first consequence to arrive that quickly. Chloe stared at me before saying, "You didn't just end our marriage. You went after my career. I told your company about decisions involving their client and their money. They decided what that meant." Her face tightened as she accused me of making the situation sound cleaner than it was. She said I had wanted to hurt her. I asked whether any fact in the email was false. Chloe avoided the question by saying Grant would clear everything up. That was the first time I heard how much faith she still had in him. She said he could explain that the bracelet was personal, the pricing decisions were normal, and the relationship had never affected business. Holloway was too important for Bellamy to risk damaging the account over a private issue. She even said Grant could remind the partners how much new work Holloway expected to place the following year. The assumption underneath her argument was obvious. Grant had money, influence, and a client relationship Bellamy valued. Chloe had converted all three into the same assumption. He could protect her too. I told her to call him if she believed he could clear it up. Chloe studied me for a second, then picked up her phone and walked upstairs. I never heard the conversation, but I saw the result when she came back down 20 minutes later. Grant had told her not to contact him on his personal number until things settled. Chloe described that as caution. To me, it sounded like the first piece of distance he had created since the review began. The next 2 days made that difference harder to ignore. Bellamy and Reed's review moved quietly. Chloe remained employed, kept her normal accounts, and continued coming to work. She was not suspended, and nobody escorted her out of the building. Holloway Development stayed with Melissa. The agency asked Chloe for a written disclosure of gifts received from Grant and for a timeline of their personal relationship. Chloe confirmed both the relationship and the undisclosed gifts. What she disputed was whether either one had affected her business judgment. Finance reviewed expense reports tied to client entertainment, while senior leadership pulled the approvals associated with discounts, fee waivers, and extra production hours. For Chloe, the review created a problem she could not solve with one explanation. Bellamy was not asking whether Grant loved her or whether our marriage was already damaged. It was comparing dates, approvals, policies, and disclosures against a relationship she had deliberately kept outside the official record. Chloe came home each evening with a new argument for why none of it should matter. She said the rush. Fee waiver had been justified. The payment extension had been reasonable. The extra production time protected the account, and the private dinners usually began with legitimate business discussion. I believed some of those explanations, which was exactly why the disclosure mattered. A conflict did not require every decision to be wrong. It meant the people evaluating those decisions deserved to know that the person making them had another interest in the outcome. Rebecca's side of the situation was developing at the same time. She did not ask me what she should do. She told me what she had already done. Holloway Development's outside accountant had reviewed Grant's executive expenses and identified several personal items that had initially been coded to company activity. Grant reimbursed those charges after the review started. On counsel's recommendation, Holloway Development's finance team added secondary review for certain discretionary executive expenses that looked personal. Grant remained CEO and majority owner. Nobody pretended Rebecca could simply remove him from the company because he had cheated on her. What changed was that spending he had once handled casually now had more eyes on it. Rebecca also told me she had met with a divorce attorney, then moved on without asking for my opinion. I respected that because her marriage was not mine to manage. 3 days after Bellamy began its internal review, Chloe received the first formal update. Her account director promotion was removed from the current review cycle. Bellamy had not denied every future promotion or demoted her. It had removed her from the current director review while the conflict investigation continued. She read the email at the kitchen table and told me this was exactly what she had warned would happen. I asked whether the message said why, and Chloe pointed to the conflict review. Then the review is what changed it, I said. You caused the review. I disclosed the conflict. She accused me of knowing Bellamy would stop the promotion. I told her I had known only that the agency should have the information before making the decision. Chloe shoved the laptop away and said that if I wanted a divorce, I could have simply filed for one. This stopped being only about our marriage when the relationship overlapped with your account. She stood and accused me of using the word conflict to make everything sound neutral. It doesn't make it neutral, I said. It makes it sound like you had no choice. I had a choice, so did you. There was nowhere useful for the argument to go after that. The next pressure came from Holloway Development. Bellamy contacted the client as part of its review. From what Chloe later told me, the agency asked whether Grant had requested any of the pricing concessions and whether the personal relationship had affected account decisions. Grant answered through his company's counsel with a position designed to keep the business lines separate. The gifts and relationship were personal. Bellamy controlled its own pricing, and Chloe controlled or recommended many of the day-to-day account adjustments. He had not instructed her to violate agency policy. Much of that could have been technically true, and it was also exactly the answer a man protecting himself would give. Chloe had expected Grant to say they made decisions together, acknowledge that he encouraged some concessions, and use his influence as the client to make Bellamy see her as valuable, rather than compromised. Instead, Grant created distance. Chloe called him again, and this time he answered. She told me about the conversation, only because she came home furious. Grant said both companies were reviewing the situation, and that they should stop discussing work or the relationship until counsel finished. Chloe reminded him that he had promised to support her director promotion. His answer was that the situation had changed. She reminded him that Holloway planned to expand its marketing budget. He said that decision would now go through a broader vendor review. She asked whether he was still planning to leave Rebecca. Grant told her he could not discuss his marriage. The same man who had spent months telling Chloe that next year could look different suddenly had no future tense left. I kept that observation to myself, because Chloe could already hear the change in his answers. Bellamy's review continued for nearly 2 more weeks. The agency did not conclude that Chloe had stolen money, taken a bribe, or intentionally handed Holloway improper discounts. Several of the underlying business decisions remained defensible on their own. It found something more ordinary and more damaging to her career. Chloe had failed to disclose a significant personal relationship with a major client executive. She had accepted gifts above the company's disclosure threshold. 2 client entertainment expense reports had descriptions that were incomplete. Once the private relationship was known, she had continued participating in pricing and service decisions involving a client whose CEO was giving her expensive personal benefits. Those findings were enough for Bellamy to act. The agency removed the Holloway account from Chloe permanently. Her director promotion was canceled for the current cycle. She received a formal written warning, and she would not be eligible for another promotion review for 12 months. Her year-end bonus was also reduced because Holloway was no longer part of her managed portfolio. She kept her job. Bellamy did not discipline her because she slept with a married man. It disciplined her because she hid a conflict while representing the agency. Chloe came home with the final decision printed out and placed the pages on the table between us. I hope this was worth it. I read the first page before telling her that the decision belonged to Bellamy. You gave them the weapon, she said. I gave them facts you should have disclosed yourself. Chloe looked away instead of answering. For months, she had believed Grant's position protected her. His money had made expensive gifts seem easy. His client status had made her feel professionally important, and his promises about next year had made uncertainty feel like opportunity. Now Holloway Development was protecting itself. Bellamy and Reed was protecting itself, and the only person still expecting loyalty to outrank risk was Chloe. Rebecca called me that weekend. Holloway Development was reviewing its marketing relationship with Bellamy for the next contract period. The company had not terminated the agency, but because the CEO and the agency account lead had an undisclosed affair, counsel wanted the next renewal evaluated more formally. Grant had also repaid the personal expenses identified in the review. None of those steps destroyed him. He still owned most of his company, still had money, and still went to work as CEO. What changed was that the private freedom he had used to make the relationship easy now had business consequences attached to it. Rebecca sounded finished rather than vindictive. And she told me that she and Grant were separating. I told her I was sorry. Rebecca replied, I am not calling for sympathy. I thought you should know because Chloe may hear that Grant is leaving the house and decide it means something it doesn't. That warning stayed with me. 2 nights later, Chloe came into the guest room holding her phone. Her expression was different from the anger I had seen after Bellamy's decision. This time she looked confused. Grant says, I made the pricing decisions on my own. I waited while she explained that Grant had told Bellamy he never asked for the rush waiver or the extra production hours. I asked whether Grant had ever directly requested those concessions in writing. Chloe admitted that he had not. When I asked whether she had personally made some of the approvals, she said she had. Then she insisted that Grant knew what she was doing. I told her, I believe you. And Chloe looked up in surprise because that was not the argument she expected from me. Knowing is not the same as taking responsibility for it when somebody starts asking questions. Her eyes filled as she said, he told me we were building something. I thought about the handbag, the bracelet, the sweets, the restaurants, the promises about next year, and the way Grant had described Chloe when the consequences were still hypothetical. Then I thought about what he had done once the consequences became real. You thought his money made you partners, I said. It made you convenient. Chloe looked at me for a long time. For once, she defended neither Grant nor the affair. She only asked, what am I supposed to do now? I left that question with her. The future she had been testing against our marriage was finally becoming real enough to evaluate, and now it looked much smaller than the life she had risked. Bellamy's final decision did not change after Chloe appealed it internally. She kept her title as senior account executive, kept her salary, and kept most of her other accounts. Holloway Development was gone, the director promotion was gone for that cycle, and the written warning would remain in her file. The 12-month promotion freeze mattered even more because the opening she had been chasing was expected to be filled long before she became eligible again. For a few weeks, Chloe tried to convince herself she could recover inside Bellamy. She worked late, volunteered for pitches, and became unusually careful with every expense and client gift that crossed her desk. None of that erased the review. Melissa kept the Holloway work while leadership redistributed some of Chloe's other responsibilities, and the people who had once treated her promotion as an obvious next step stopped talking about it around her. Chloe never told me anyone openly humiliated her. What bothered her was quieter. She had spent years building the image of someone moving upward, and now she had to walk into the same office, knowing the next step had been delayed because of a conflict she had hidden. She started coming home later and talking less about work. When she did talk about Bellamy, the language had changed. Before the gala, she described accounts by size, visibility, and what they could do for her career. After the review, she talked about policies, internal politics, and how quickly people became cautious when a situation made them uncomfortable. I did not remind her that caution was exactly what she had once disliked about me. 3 months after the gala, Chloe accepted a job at a smaller agency. The salary was slightly lower, but not dramatically so, and the title was similar. She would still have clients, still earn a good living, and still have a career. What disappeared was the trajectory she believed Grant was helping accelerate. There was no director title waiting, no Holloway account carrying her into the next review cycle, and no powerful client promising to make senior leadership see her as indispensable. She had not lost the ability to work. She had lost the shortcut she thought she had found. By then, our marriage had moved from confrontation into paperwork. My attorney and hers were working through the townhouse, the $86,000 house fund, retirement accounts, vehicles, and the rest of what 6 years had tied together. Because we had no children, there was no custody fight to turn the divorce into a second story. The house fund was divided through the normal process. Chloe did not lose her share because she cheated, and I did not gain more because I had been the one who discovered it. The existing balance was treated as marital property, exactly as it should have been. That also meant the financial action I took earlier had done exactly what I intended and nothing more. I had stopped adding new money to a shared future without trying to rewrite ownership of the money we had already saved. Chloe lost the assumption that my next bonus would keep building the house plan, not the portion of the existing fund that legally belonged to her. The townhouse took more discussion, only because neither of us wanted to stay there long term. We eventually agreed to sell it and divide the net proceeds after the mortgage and closing costs were handled. It was expensive, inconvenient, and ordinary. Nothing about the divorce made me feel as if I had won money. The larger consequence for Chloe came from the future she had assumed would replace the marriage. Rebecca's separation from Grant became more formal over the same period. I knew only what Rebecca chose to tell me. Her attorney had started working through marital property and ownership issues, while Holloway Development remained operational, and Grant remained CEO. The marketing relationship with Bellamy also went through a formal review before renewal. Holloway eventually kept Bellamy for part of its work, while moving another portion to a second agency. That result was almost boring, compared with what Chloe once believed Grant could do with a phone call. He could not restore her promotion, put her back on the account, or make the conflict disappear. Once those limits became obvious, Grant stopped sounding like the man Chloe had described to me for 8 months. At first, she insisted the distance was temporary. Grant was under pressure from counsel. Rebecca was making everything difficult. His company needed time, and the divorce had to settle down. Chloe still spoke as if the future he had promised was waiting on the other side of paperwork. That belief became her last remaining version of control. Bellamy had taken away the promotion path. Our divorce had removed the marriage she once treated as stable. But Grant was also separating from Rebecca. Chloe interpreted that as proof that at least one part of the future she imagined might still survive. She never said she expected a wedding or a new house with him. Her hope was subtler. She believed that once the reviews ended and both marriages were out of the way, Grant would finally be free to choose her openly. In her mind, the affair had become expensive, but it had not yet become pointless. I stopped arguing with that belief because reality was doing a better job than I could. A month after Chloe started at the smaller agency, Grant ended the relationship by phone. I knew only because Chloe told me that evening. She came to the townhouse to collect documents related to the sale and stayed standing in the entryway after I handed them over. Grant says we shouldn't see each other anymore. I waited for her to continue, and Chloe added that Grant believed everything was too exposed now. The wording sounded exactly like the kind of calculation he had been making since both companies became involved. Chloe looked embarrassed by how much it hurt and explained that Grant needed to focus on the company and his divorce. When she asked about the future they had discussed, he gave her nothing concrete. For months, he had told her that next year could look different. Once next year started costing him something, the future disappeared from the conversation. The timing mattered. Grant did not end things while the relationship was easy and private. He ended them after Chloe lost the account, after Rebecca involved lawyers and company counsel, and after his own spending started receiving more scrutiny. The relationship had not suddenly become immoral to him. It had become expensive in ways the bracelet and hotel rooms never were. Chloe still tried to explain it for him, saying he was dealing with more pressure than she was. I reminded her that she was under pressure too. Chloe insisted it was not the same, and I agreed that the two situations were different without pretending that made Grant's withdrawal temporary. She looked at me with irritation and said I had always hated what Grant represented. That surprised me because it was closer to the truth than most of the things she had said during the divorce. I did hate what Grant had come to represent inside our marriage. But it was not his money by itself. It was Chloe's belief that a normal good life had become embarrassing because someone richer could offer a faster one. When I told her that, she shook her head and said I was making her sound shallow. I told her that wanting more was not a crime. What ended the marriage was lying to me while she tested whether somebody richer could give her the life she wanted faster. That was the part she still resisted. Chloe wanted the affair separated from the calculation behind it. She wanted Grant to be an emotional mistake, and the gifts to be incidental benefits around that mistake. The sequence said something different. Chloe had not left me for Grant. She had kept me while she evaluated him. Our savings plan, house plan, income structure, and ordinary stability all remained in place, while she tested whether Grant could provide something she thought was better. That distinction became impossible to avoid when the divorce papers were nearly finished. We met at the townhouse one Saturday to divide the last personal items before the sale. Furniture had been assigned, financial accounts had been separated, and recurring bills had been moved into individual names. The bracelet was no longer in the house. Chloe had returned it through Grant's office months earlier, and the designer handbag had gone back with it. The hotel stays, dinners, and travel upgrades were benefits. She could not simply put in a box and undo. She was packing books when she said, "I never actually left you." I let her finish as she reminded me that she had never moved out for Grant, filed for divorce, or explicitly told me she was choosing him. All of that was true in the narrowest possible sense. I put down the box I was holding and said, "You were waiting to see if he was worth leaving me for." Chloe stopped with the book still in her hands. I did not add a speech because the sentence already contained the part she had avoided saying. If Grant stayed married, if the promotion failed, or if the expensive future remained uncertain, she could continue coming home and describe that as choosing our marriage. If he offered enough certainty, I believed she would have given the same delay a different name. Chloe sat on the edge of the sofa and stared at the floor. After a while, she said, "I thought I had time." That was probably the clearest description she ever gave of what she had been doing. She thought she had time to keep the marriage stable while Grant decided what he wanted. Time to see whether Holloway expanded the account. Time to see whether she became director. And time to let both futures develop before choosing between them. What she had not planned for was the possibility that consequences would make the choice before she finished comparing options. Our divorce became final a few weeks later. I did not speak to Rebecca much after that. Several months later, she sent a short message saying her divorce from Grant was still moving forward, and that Holloway Development had permanently tightened its executive expense controls. Grant was still wealthy, still CEO, and still living a life Chloe once considered proof that he could offer more. He simply was not offering that life to her. Chloe stayed at the smaller agency. A mutual friend later told me the work was fine, and the people were decent. She was not ruined, unemployed, or desperate. She was simply back in a career where advancement would depend on doing the work without a powerful client, privately promising to accelerate it. That consequence required no one to destroy her. The life she had once called too slow was now something she had to rebuild from a smaller starting point. I had my own costs. Selling the townhouse took longer than expected. Legal fees consumed money I would rather have kept, and the house purchase Chloe and I had planned was delayed by almost a year. For several months, I rented an apartment closer to work and lived with fewer rooms, less furniture, and no reason to pretend the delay felt noble. It was simply what divorce cost. Living alone also simplified the old argument Chloe and I had repeated over houses. I no longer felt any need to defend why I did not want the biggest payment a bank would approve. Eventually, I started looking at houses again, this time buying alone. The first agent I worked with kept trying to move my budget upward because my income qualified me for more than I wanted to spend. One Saturday, she showed me a new development with oversized kitchens, 3-car garages, and entryways built to impress people from the curb. It reminded me too much of the listings Chloe used to send. The agent said another $120,000 would move me into one of those houses comfortably enough on paper. I asked for the real monthly payment after taxes and insurance, looked at the number, and felt no temptation. The next house was older, smaller, and on a quiet street 20 minutes from work. It had 3 bedrooms, a decent yard, a kitchen that did not belong in a magazine, and a payment I could carry without reorganizing the rest of my life around it. The agent pointed out that I could afford something newer and offered to keep looking. I walked through the living room again, opened the back door, and looked at the yard. Number this one is enough. A year earlier, Chloe would have heard that sentence as surrender. I did not anymore. I signed for a house I could afford without treating it like a smaller version of somebody else's life. It was enough, because I had chosen what enough meant. If you enjoy stories where betrayal finally meets consequences, subscribe for the next one. This is Blood Never Lies.